An 8,000-year winemaking tradition, a monastery that's been making wine continuously for 1,000 years, and basement wine. This week, it's wine from the country of Georgia.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel podcast for foodies. Destination Eat Drink is where food and travel intersect here at the Destination Eat Drink podcast and also on the Destination Eat Drink YouTube channel and on destinationeatdrink.com. This week, we're talking wine from the country of Georgia, the oldest winemaking region in the world with an 8,000-year winemaking tradition. But first, if you're a fan of food and travel, be sure to rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. And if you really like Destination Eat Drink, you can make a one-time or recurring contribution in any amount at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. And thank you very, very much. Tommo and Megsy are the brains behind the Tbilisi podcast, a great show about Georgia, its food, and its wine. Tommo is also the founder of Eat This Food and Wine Tours at eatthistours.com, and Megsy runs the Food Fun Travel website at foodfuntravel.com. Tommo and Megsy were on the show last week talking about Georgian cuisine, and I wanted to have them back to talk about the wine from this fascinating country with such a long history of winemaking. They tell me about the irony of Georgia being the oldest winemaking place in the world, and also one of the youngest winemaking industries. And we talk about a couple of the winemaking regions in Georgia, aging wine in clay pots, and Tommo and Megsy give several recommendations for your trip to Georgia. Wine nerds, you are going to love this episode, so let's drink.
Destination Eat Drink.
Tommo from Eat This Food and Wine Tours, Megsy from Food Fun Travel. Welcome back to Destination Eat Drink. We're going to talk Georgian wine today.
Yes.
Happy
This
to be
is
back.
good. Yeah, I love wine.
This is such an amazing topic because I first became acquainted with Georgian wine years ago when I was in Bordeaux, France, and they have this wonderful wine museum, and they had a whole exhibit on Georgian wine, and I just stood there slack-jawed like, what? 8,000 years they've been making wine in Georgia? This is absolutely incredible. Give me a quick thumbnail. I know you can't condense 8,000 years into 30 seconds, but try to give me some of the highlights of the history of Georgian wine and especially how far back it goes.
So yeah, in a very short nutshell sort of portion, we have got 6,000 BC is approximately when they have carbon dated the pottery from some old wine pots too. So it's believed that this was definitely wine. It was not grape juice. There are different chemicals that they found stained on the pottery to show that it was wine. So wine was made, and it was made purposefully inside a vessel. So it wasn't just by accident that it was just found on the ground or something. It was definitely human intervention that made this happen. The site where this was discovered is still being explored. It was actually only the early 2000s when they first found this and then got it carbon dated and showed it. So it's a relatively recent situation that we know about this at all. It's about 20 miles south of Tbilisi, so it's actually not far at all. They haven't opened a museum there yet, so you can't really go there, but they are planning to open one quite soon. And so there's been this incredible continuous winemaking tradition in clay pots, which here are called quevris. They're a bit like amphora, but they have sort of more a teardrop-shaped base, where all of the skins and seeds and other parts that they might put in will all float to the bottom slowly via gravity after the wine is aging on skins. And that is one of the main characteristics of Georgian amber wine, which is sort of an orange and amber colors that you get, is that their white grapes are fermented on skins, and that brings all this extra color that you don't see in normal white wines. So this history has been continued, and today, after 8,000 years, or 8,000 vintages, as people like to say, the Quevri wine is still being made in very similar ways as it was 8,000 years ago, by just, you crush the grapes, you throw them in the pot, you let them ferment, and then you seal the Quevri and let them age. And that's it. It's really that simple. The only main differences today are that the hygiene standards have improved and the scientific understanding of how wine is made has improved enough that people using these techniques to make wine in Qvevri are now able to use that to make better wine. So the wine we're tasting today is definitely better than what our 8,000-year-old ancestors would have been tasting. We now have some really fantastic, interesting, vibrant, incredible Georgian wines. What they were drinking 8,000 years ago might have been a bit funky. Let's say that.
Right.
There's more history in between, so I don't know. We can talk about whichever sections you want to as we go along.
Well, I think to me, one of the most interesting things is this traditional winemaking process using the amphora clay pots, because here in Portugal, there's a region in Portugal, in Alentejo, where they still have a few guys hanging on to making wine, fermenting it in amphora. And I've tasted this wine. I have not tasted Georgian wine, but I've tasted this wine. And to me, the clay pots seem to impart quite a bit of minerality to the wines. Do you find the same in Georgia?
This is a really controversial topic that's being explored by scientists as we speak.
So I'm stepping into it immediately.
So this brief synopsis for this, because it is going to get very technical otherwise, is that the current theory, and this is still under discussion, is that the type of clay and the temperature to which it was baked affects how inert the actual vessel is. So if it's baked to a very high temperature, then it doesn't have much influence on the flavor at all. And you could be fermenting in glass, for example, and you maybe would be getting a similar result. If the clay hasn't been baked as much or hasn't been baked at all, then, well, not obviously it's been baked a bit. If it hasn't been baked enough for it to become a clay vessel that could actually be used to a good standard, then you can actually get some particles of the vessel that are breaking off, like microparticles breaking off. So you are actually drinking clay. So that could that could be an actual problem, not necessarily a healthy problem to have. And then somewhere in between, it's currently conjectured at least that yes, there is some influence that could be leading to some minerality in wines, but also some blind tasting has said, yeah, the ones that are baked at a higher temperature, blind tasted, it's just all in your head. Potentially. So this is so controversial that I can't give you an answer. I'm hoping that in the next 10 years we'll start to have more science on this.
You mentioned that the white wine grapes stay in contact with the skin, which is, up until recently, very unusual in that most wine is fermented just the juice, white wine, fermented just the juice. Now you see some grape skin contact, and this is called orange wine or called amber wine. And I've told this story before on the podcast. When I was an amateur winemaker, I didn't know any better. So I just left the grape skins on. I'm like, that's how we make the red wine. This is how we're going to make the white wine. And so I was making amber wine without knowing it. And I put it in the bottle and I'm like, what is this off color? This doesn't look right. Not realizing this is decades ago, before amber wine started to become a thing again. Little did I know that I was taking part in a 8,000-year-old tradition of Georgian white winemaking.
Yeah, exactly. So the phenolic compounds in the skins are also what gives color to red wines. So if you made red wine without any skin contact, then you would have much, much, much lighter colors. In fact, a lot of red wines with zero skin contact would be rosés. They would look like a rosé. They may even be classified as a rosé, depending on who's classifying them and which sort of style it is. So that's a major factor to consider here, is that it is the skins in red wine and it is the skins in white wine that can affect the color significantly. So this is the most traditional way of making wine, probably, almost certainly, because it's a lot easier to not separate the skins. You need some equipment to be able to separate the skins, and that equipment would not have been available 8,000 years ago, not been invented. So it's just the simplest way to make white wine. And for me, it provides a completely different type of wine. So when you taste these wines, you're getting quite different flavors. And there's some technical stuff we could go into on that as well. It depends on where you want to go with this podcast.
Yeah, I think I'd like to know a little bit more about why they taste different with the skin contact. I mean, we know it tastes different, but what is the scientific or technical reason?
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of different factors that affect how the flavors come out. But because of those phenolic compounds having a longer time to macerate, and because they even leave those skins in for 6 or 7 months in the traditional method, it just means there's more intensity of those flavors that can be found, and you often get more of that flavor coming through. So you might be getting some of the same flavors. You might be ending up with peach and apricot and these that you can also find in European white wines, but the intensity of them can be quite different. And you're also getting the tannic elements, tannins that you would get in red wine that create that sort of drying effect in your mouth. You're also getting those in white wines, and that can affect your perception of how you're tasting the wine as well. And one of the other things with Qvevri method that's quite different is that oxygenation of the wine is more prevalent. The Qvevri itself, the top of the Qvevri is quite a large open space, and obviously they do seal it, but there's quite a lot of oxygen in and out in between sealing and testing and stuff, whereas when you're using a steel tank, you can control the oxygenation very, very thoroughly with a steel tank modern production method. So a lot of these sort of oxygenated tastes that you're going to get in wines as they get a bit older, maybe like walnut, maybe dried fruits, and those sorts of things, you can find these in Qvevri wines that are only like 6 months old and just came out, whereas in white wines from Europe, you might be waiting 4 or 5 years with the wine in the bottle before that sort of micro-oxidation through the cork starts to affect and bring those flavors into the wines. So you can consider it as being an intense process that's bringing out fruits and different flavors much faster than you might have where if you're fermenting at a cold temperature, like with white wines, and with lots of control of the oxygenation after the fermentation completes as well.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the regions, some of the winemaking regions. Georgia's a big country, bigger than I expected. And I'm wondering, if folks fly into a place like Tbilisi, which is probably their starting point undoubtedly when they come to Georgia, are there wine regions within reach of Tbilisi, and what would be some of the main ones?
So one of the main things to know about Georgia in general is the fact that everybody makes wine. Absolutely everyone. So
nice.
Depending on whether or not you want to get good wine, you can probably just drive a little bit out of the city, knock on someone's door and be like, "Can I have some wine?" And they'd be like, "Of course, here, have some wine." But one of the closest places, there are a couple of wineries that you can visit that do say they're from the Tbilisi region, but probably the next door neighbor would be Mtskheta, which is the former capital of Georgia, actually. So it's a little bit more archaeological sort of stuff, that like old churches and stuff. It's like where the birth of Christianity in Georgia.
Yeah, this was the capital in like the 5th century.
Yeah,
this is where Christianity was founded. That's before Tbilisi was founded, like 4th century and before. Mtskheta was actually the capital.
Yeah. So you definitely find some wineries there that you can go and try some of the wines from that area.
And to clarify, like the vineyards, like the vines are being grown mostly outside of the city, of course, but the actual place where they're making the wine, where their Qvevris are, is often in the city. And in Tbilisi, even in our apartment block where we live, which is just a regular residential apartment block, there are people making wine in the basement of our apartment block.
Yeah.
It doesn't smell like
Awesome.
It's good wine, and I haven't tried any of it, but they are just making wine. So like everyone who can find a place to make wine is making wine. It's quite crazy. Sorry, Meg, go on.
No, that's fine. No, but it's good to know that. So there's naturally different levels of wine, from, as Tom said, your basement funky stuff to, your higher end, wineries that you can go and visit. A lot of people, it's really interesting at the moment, is that a lot of people are definitely buying grapes. Like, so while there are definitely a lot of wineries that grow their own grapes, there's so much experimentation that's going on at the moment that people are definitely like getting grapes from here and getting grapes from there and seeing how it works in there. Because one of the things Tom will definitely mention is how much of a different microclimates Georgia has. So depending on where you're making the wine is going to change the flavors and everything so dramatically, just because of the different microclimate that it happens to be in.
Yeah, so in terms of regions in general, as Meg said, Mtskheta, which is a city just north of Tbilisi that's in the area of Kartli, which is sort of like the heartland of Georgia, like central Georgia. But to the east of Tbilisi is Kakheti, which is by far the biggest producing region. This has, it's crazy what the numbers are. It's something like almost 90% of all production in Georgia is just in Kakheti. And then there's so much diversity in the rest of the country, but Kakheti just makes so much wine in general, so much total volume of wine, that it sort of dwarfs all of this diversity a little bit. And in Kakheti, they're making the two most famous wines from the grapes Katsateli and Saperavi. So Saperavi is red, Katsateli is the sort of the most famous white grape that they also use to make the amber wines, of course. They're making so much quantity just from them. Those two grapes make up about, it's somewhere around 75+% of all grape production is just those two grapes. And then beyond that, there's like another 525 grapes that are making up all of the rest of the wine. Not all of them are being used to make wine. There's probably about 80 to 100 are being used to make wine currently.
Kakheti is definitely the most popular wine region in Georgia that most people have heard of. They're the biggest wine producers in all of Georgia, and it is only about a 2-hour drive to get there. It's not too far away at all.
You can get to the edge of Kakheti in 1 hour to like the first parts. We were talking about in the last episode about Giovanni Winery, which they make fantastic wines. They're just over an hour from Tbilisi. And then you keep driving into the Alazani Valley, which is the biggest wine-producing valley of Kakheti. It's huge. I mean, it's a few hundred kilometers long. It's wine on both sides of the river valley. You've got the Caucasus Mountains to the north, which are stunning and like snow-capped during the winter and into the spring. And then on the south side of the valley is actually some of the most intense and interesting wines of the whole of that region. So those are two pretty popular regions, and Imereti in the west is probably the third region of Georgia as well that makes a lot of wine.
You mentioned the two major grapes that are grown in Kakheti, and I'm wondering, are these Georgian indigenous grapes?
Yes.
Absolutely. There's actually about 523 indigenous grape varieties in Georgia.
Yeah, but they keep discovering new ones, so it's definitely more than that now.
And do you have a place where you would recommend if folks are on their own? Now, I recommend that they take the tour with you because they're going to learn so much more and get so much more information and so much more out of it culturally. But do you have one winery that you say, all right, if you're going to go on your own, this is the place where you should go?
Giovanni.
Yeah, Giovanni's a really good one. Going as a solo person, it's a little bit tricky because they don't have quite the amount of footfall because they're a bit smaller and less known, but they are making fantastic award-winning wines. I would say that Shumi is probably one of the most straightforward ones for tourists to get to, Shumi, as it sounds. This is a really big winery. They make about 3 million bottles a year, but the reason I recommend it is because their premium range is actually really good and still a reasonable price that's accessible to your average tourist. And it's sort of like, $12, $15 a bottle sort of price. It's not like $100 a bottle craziness. And they have a little museum, so you're going to learn a bit about the wines. They have a great view of the mountains, and they also have a restaurant there. And as a solo traveler, you can go in and you can get a bit of information as well.
They also have the vineyard there where they have the different grape varieties, so you can actually
It's like
see
a nursery of grapes. You can sort of learn about all the different grapes that they are growing from Georgia. So that one's in Telavi. Giovanni is much closer to Tbilisi. Giovanni's only like an hour away, whereas Telavi and the Shumi winery is a little bit over 2 hours driving. But you are then in the main Alazani Valley with the mountain views. So, it depends what you're looking for and how much time you have, I guess.
One thing I found really fascinating listening to your podcast, Tommo and Megsy, was the fact that a lot of these wineries are relatively new.
Yeah.
You go around Portugal and you find wineries that have been around for 100 years, even longer. Of course, you go into Spain and Italy and France, hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's not the same case in Georgia, but there's a very, very good reason for that, right?
Yeah, that was the Soviet occupation during, after, it's been on and off for quite some time.
But most people think it's still going on, and 20% of the country is still occupied.
So basically, one of the things a lot of people didn't actually realize is that Joseph Stalin is actually from Georgia. He is a Georgian who was born in Gori. But that didn't stop him from destroying the wine population here. So he just basically decided that they were going to only have Cazzotelli and Saperavi. They're very robust grapes and they grow very well, and they do a lot of
high yield. They
yield.
produce a lot of wine, so it
Yeah.
helps them to make a lot of budget wine very easily.
So basically, that's all anybody was allowed to grow. And then under the Soviet occupation, the way it worked was that, you know, a certain amount had to go to Russia to supply all of their wine needs, and then only a very small amount was being able to be kept by the families. There were some people doing some, you know, black market, trying to do their own sort of experiments and stuff, but I don't know, the penalty for being caught for doing stuff like that was quite high. So people were just basically doing Cazzotelli Saperavi. They weren't really putting a lot of love into it, shall we say. It was just trying to be mass produced to just make wine, not to make good wine.
Winemaking was turned into a factory process to make lots and lots and lots of bulk and no interest in quality. And yeah, as Meg said, although home producers were still allowed to make their own wine and did, everyone, as they do now, was making their own wine at home. They were limited. Once they got to a certain quantity, they were supposed to donate all of it to the state, and they weren't allowed to sell it because private commerce was illegal. So as Meg mentioned, like black market would be the only option to sell that wine, or you drink it at home yourself. So the history of winemaking here is sort of different. That before the Soviet era, it wasn't really commercialized in the same way as maybe it was in Western Europe, in
Everyone
France.
just made wine for their
Everyone made their own
families
wine at
or the
home. No
village.
one was really going out to buy loads of wine. So there weren't that many famous like exporters or producers that were producing any sort of mass scale. Until the 19th century, there really wasn't very much going on in that sense at all. Everyone was just making their own wine. So yeah, I've also been trying to do some personal research to find out some wineries that have been continuously making wine since before the 19th century. And
When
thus
did
far,
Sinandali
Sinandali was early 19th century. So Sinandali Estate is one of the famous estates here that you can come and visit. They're still making wine now, but it was established in, I think, 1812 was their first vintage. I believe it was around that time. So it's been more challenging. I've been asking Georgians about it as well. And although I visited a few 17th century wine cellars, they do still exist. They're mostly sort of smaller locations or family-owned places. These were not like large-scale production or exporters particularly. So I would love to find something that we could take people to that was older than the 19th century, but we haven't. It just doesn't really exist apart from the like relics in the monasteries. And yeah, there's one monastery in Carchetti called Alaverdi Monastery. They've recorded continuously making wine since 1011 AD.
Wow.
So they've got over 1,000 years of wine production, which is actually one of the oldest in Europe, I believe. I don't know what the history is in the rest of Europe, but you can't just go and visit them and go in the cellar. You can taste wine, you can buy wine outside the monastery. So it's an amazing place where you take everyone on tours there, but you can't go and see them making wine. You can't visit the cellar unless you're like the Prime Minister or something. It's quite hard to get a tasting. And the wines are very expensive as well. So yeah, doing a basic tasting, if you're one person turning up and buying a bottle of wine, you're going to be spending quite a lot to taste anything. So the monasteries are sort of the only places, and they were not doing this for massive commerce either. It's still small scale production. So they don't have this sort of famous history of large chateaus or anything like that.
I need to befriend the Prime Minister of Georgia so that I can go visit that.
I've never managed to get a visit in the cellar. I'm still trying to get to visit their cellar. I hope to have friends that will get me in there at some point, but it's been a long journey to get there.
Keep working. Keep the eye on the prize there, Tommo. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, you mentioned the Imereti wine region. Tell me a little bit about that. Are there different grapes grown? What's the microclimate like there?
It's over the central mountain range of Georgia, which means it's towards the Black Sea, so it's heading into subtropical, a bit more humidity on that side. So you definitely get different characters. Harvest happens a bit later, sort of mid-October rather than mid-September. So it takes a little bit longer for the grapes to be ready and ripe and ready to make wine. They're known for making lighter-bodied wines, more acidic wines. The grapes that grow on that side have thinner skins, so they have way less tannins when they make them with skin contact. and they don't have quite the same sort of character as East Georgian wines, which are very heavy and tannic normally. So this side is actually, the Imeretian side is really good for first-time tasters, even though it's not that famous outside of Georgia compared to Kakheti. This region is ideal because you're going to taste something a little bit more similar to what you'd expect with a Western European white wine, even though there is skin contact. It just, strong acids, lighter flavors like wild flowers, green apple, citrus, this sort of stuff. But also still made in qvevris, often. Not always, but all the traditional production is still being made in these clay pots. So that area, I think it's great. If you fly into Kutaisi Airport, which is sort of the second airport of Georgia, then definitely spend a day in the wine region there before traveling anywhere else, because I think you'll discover something more familiar, and then you can sort of work towards the crazy, heavy Kakhetian amber wines.
And do you have a favorite winery in this region?
Oh, yeah. Bayer's Winery. It's a winery that's run by three siblings. It's two sisters and a brother, Bayer, Gvanza, and Georgi. And they just are doing a fantastic job, not only just of doing really incredible wines, but also just traveling all around the world promoting Georgian wines. They're just really great people that are promoting Georgian wine around the world, and they also make really good wines as well. Always happy to catch up with them.
Yeah, and it's small production, so they're artisan production, mostly made in qvevri. I think their production's somewhere between 40 and 100,000 bottles a year. I'm not sure the exact amount now because they have grown a lot in the last couple of years. They've been developing very fast.
Amazing work.
But somewhere up to 100,000 bottles. And by Georgian standards, 100,000 bottles is already what I call a medium-sized winery, because most of the small artisan wineries are making less than 25,000 bottles a year, and they really are bespoke product. Right. But those guys are still keeping it very close to the artisan traditions, and so even though it's a slightly larger production than the micro producers, they're definitely honouring the sort of history of Georgian winemaking, and but whilst also doing some experiments. So they got rosé now as well, which Georgians would be like, "What's a rosé? What's that for?"
And they're doing their pet nats
and pet
now
nats
as well.
and other things. So yeah, they're also being creative because they're a bit younger as well. They're sort of in their 30s, so they're newer to winemaking. I think they started about 10 years ago, but their family has been making wines for generations, and they've sort of taken those traditions and then done it their own way and done some modern twists on the wine as well.
You mentioned again the amphora fermenting process in the clay pots. I'm wondering, is there any tradition of oak barrel aging at all? Or is it all done in these clay pots?
Oh, oak aged is my favorite type.
It's not Georgian tradition though.
No, it's not traditional. But you take a nice cazzatelli and then put it in an oak barrel, or even saperavi, then that turns it into a Mukazani if it comes from the Mukazani region.
Can do, yes.
I love it. I know some people don't really like oak aged things. It's
fallen out of fashion the last 5 or 10
fashion.
years. Some people are anti-oak now, but I still like oak.
It. I will take it. Oh, yum.
Yeah, the oak doesn't have any specific tradition in Georgia before the 19th century, whereas we mentioned at Sinandali Estate, they started to make wine like without skin contact for white wines, for example. They also started to use oak barrels as well. And a lot of the larger wine companies that can actually afford to buy oak barrels, they do. So they'll have ranges that are made in European classical style with oak barrel aging as well, and doing wines that are made in qvevri without oak, and doing wines made in qvevri that are then put in oak. So as I said, there is a lot of experimentation going on, and seeing how qvevri wine works in oak is an interesting way to explore Georgian wine as well.
What is kind of the flavor profile when you go from clay to oak, Tommo?
It brings in the same classic tastes that you'd expect if you're a red wine drinker, especially. You'll know whether, depending on the type of oak barrel, maybe you're getting vanilla. If it's a lighter oak barrel, maybe you're getting down to coffee and dark chocolate if it's a more toasted oak barrel. So I wouldn't say that the introduction of oak creates some sort of new hybrid wine that you've never tasted before. I think what the oak does is it brings the sort of nature of Georgian wines towards a European taste. So it's Europeanizing the Georgian wine a little bit. in that sense. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's good to have both Qvevri wine pure and naked as it is, or the oaked versions as well. They can soften out some of the crazy tannins that you might get in Georgian wines. And yeah, the same for the white wines. Oaking some of the white wines or amber wines can be interesting and bring in some of those same sort of vanilla tones maybe. It's quite typical with Cazzelli that you'd use a lighter oak barrel and you would have something like vanilla-y.
Harvest season is coming up for the grapes, and not too long. You do a super cool harvest tour where you go out to family wineries. Can you tell me a little bit about this? Because I think what you're doing is quite unique in the tourism industry.
I think we're sort of really fortunate here that the market and the people that are the small winemakers are so interested in foreign tourists being here that it's still sort of novel. And for them, what we've managed to achieve is we have a lot of dates in September, October, where the winemaker will actually host guests while they are making the wine, and you can help them harvest and see them start the winemaking process, crushing the grapes, putting the grapes in the Qvevris. Now, with most of Western Europe, I believe, unless you're sort of like a trained expert and they're going to let you actually stand around and watch them do it, the regular consumer tourist is not going to get invited to the winery whilst they're making wine. They're going to be sent away and told, go away, stay away from us for a month because we're busy doing important stuff. And it's not that the winemaking here isn't also important, but the sort of the culture of making wine here, family wine at family wineries, has always been that your cousins and your aunts and everybody turn up to your house for the weekend, and you pick all of your grapes and you go and make wine together as a family, and then you sit down and have the supra, which we talked about in the last episode. They celebrate the harvest with the wine from the previous season, and it's a fantastically cultural event that the family would do anyway. But we're able to actually take tourists there to help as if you were their family members coming over for the weekend or for the day to help them. And then like the following weekend, that family that picked on the 15th of September, well, the next weekend on the 21st of September, they would then go to their family's place and pick their grapes. So they sort of like all travel around every weekend to each other's family homes and help each other harvest so that they can get everything done when the grapes are ready to pick. So yeah, I think we've managed to achieve this pretty amazing synergy with the small producers that we're actually able to bring guests there to be part of the family for those events and to really see what would happen at a normal, it's called a Rutveli. Rutveli is the name. It's like the wine harvest festival for the families. These happen across the whole country all the time. Families are doing this every weekend during the harvest season, but it's not always that easy to turn up to one, and some of them are sort of like staged and fake, and you go to a wine restaurant and they get you to come outside and step on some grapes for 5 minutes and then they feed you a meal, and that's sort of like an artificial version for tourists. But what we're doing is actually being part of the family, so we get amazing feedback from guests who come on these tours.
Now let's say we're just in Tbilisi. Is there a culture of going into wine bars and tasting different vintages from different wineries, or is it just you walk in and whatever happens to be the house wine is what you're going to get?
It really does depend on which wine bar you go into. There are a lot of wine bars that you can choose from in Tbilisi, and some of them, yeah, you can have, there's a really popular one called 8,000 Vintages, and they will have a whole bunch of bottles that have been opened that you can try some from. Or they also have like those what are those machines
Some
called?
of them have those like nitrogen sealed dispenser cabinets.
Put your little card in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they can give you a little
Yeah,
serving. Yeah. Some of them have that, but that's like only a few
so
places
that's
have
with
that
like
sort of thing.
the bigger sort of wine stores, but the smaller places, basically you'll just see a wall of wine bottles, and you choose which one you want, and then you drink that bottle, you buy that bottle and drink it. That's generally...
But you're paying sort of shop price. I think that's one of the
yeah.
craziest things with these wine bars here. The majority of the sort of the wine bar scene is not like a wine bar restaurant. It's like a wine bar that maybe does cheese and ham boards and things. But all of the wines that you see on the wall, it says what the price is on the bottle, and whatever the price on the bottle is, you can either take it away or you can just sit down and drink it there. So they're not really, for some reason, they're not marking up the bottles. So if you want to try a lot of wines and you've got a group of people and you can come and try like 4 or 5 bottles, you can do it pretty cost effectively as well, which is great. Or you can book a tasting with one of their wine hosts or a sommelier perhaps.
Yep.
And you can sit down and learn a bit more about all the different grape varieties from around the country and that sort of thing.
Naturally, there is also a lot of wine events that happen, especially during the summer months. There's a lot of festivals that happen, for example. So the festivals are often free sometimes, and you can turn up and you can meet the winemakers, and you'll go from stall to stall, tasting their wines, meeting them, talking about their wineries, having some of the local cheeses and stuff like that. And it's the New Wine Festival, which was a couple of weekends ago. That is all completely free. You can just turn up, taste the wine, meet everybody, and have a really great day out. Some other festivals you have to pay to get into, but it's not really
it's normally like $15, $20 to get in, and then you've got like 6 hours of trying wines, and you can drink as much as you want, pretty much.
You often get a complimentary wine glass as well.
Yeah, the festivals are great to come. May, June, and October, early mid-October are sort of the peak season for wine festivals like this, where they've got loads going on and winemakers come and, you'll have like 100 producers or more will come in and show off their wines, and you can taste them.
From big to small.
Yeah, some very large wineries, but also some tiny wineries that are making like 3, 4, 5,000 bottles a year, like real micro producers.
Well, Tommo from Eat This Food and Wine Tours, Megsy from Food Fun Travel. It's been great talking to you. We'll have links to your sites in the show description so people can look you up and book tours and learn more about Georgian wine and cuisine for that matter. Thank you so much for being on the show. It has made me so invigorated to get to Georgia and sample some wine and crush some grapes with the family. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having us, yeah. And send everyone to Georgia because it's like a golden age right now. If you come in 10 years' time, it might be too touristy. I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. But right now, it's just at that perfect point where everything is working, but it doesn't feel like you're a product. When you come here, you really feel like you're welcome. It's amazing.
Okay, that's Tommo and Megsy from the Tbilisi podcast, Eat This Food Tours, and foodfuntravel.com. I've got links to all their stuff in the show notes. You can get in touch with them if you're planning a trip to Georgia, which is what we should all be doing right now. Well, that's it for this week. Next week, it's Capri Cafaro talking about her new show, America the Bountiful, and a pear and ginger martini, hot cherry salsa, and Grandma's cookbooks. Don't miss that. Until then, I just published a brand new story about 2 of the best streets for tapas in all of Spain, and they're both in a small city called Logrono. You can read that at destinationeatdrink.com/blog. I also just posted a new video about escaping the heat from Lisbon. We've had a hot summer here in Portugal, and I found a spot just 45 minutes from Lisbon that's typically 20 to 25 degrees cooler in the summer. And it's also got great food. You can watch that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com or by going to my YouTube channel at Destination Eat Drink 946. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson. I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.